Join me in welcoming Andrew Wells, FAIA.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me here today. This is quite an honor to get to come speak to you guys about a little bit about our practice. Like John said, we're a firm of about 22 people, I think. Probably like a lot of you, we've been hiring people lately, so it's been kind of hard to keep track. But we founded our firm in 2004 in Springfield, my partner Brandon Dake and I. And we just recently kind of set foot into the Kansas City market by establishing an office there. So what I want to do today, I've probably got way too many slides, so forgive me. But we may go kind of fast in some moments. But I've got 6 projects that I want to show you and kind of show you a little bit of the progression of our firm and try to weave in some stories maybe about how we think about the work in the context that in the place that we work. So this is a view from our office in Springfield. So we're right there on the square. That's a Lawrence Halpern designed square, one of the last projects that he did before he died. But Springfield is about 160,000 people in the city limits, maybe 450 in what they call the MSA. But as you can see, it's very much a low-rise city. So it's kind of a big town more than it is a small city. And one of the reasons that my partner and I really decided to establish a practice there, aside from the fact that we had, kind of grown up in Missouri, but we always felt like Springfield was kind of right on the cusp of transitioning into a more significant place as the 3rd largest city in the state. So the photo on the top is Wild Bill Hickok, and he's gunning down Dave Tutt in the right-hand side of the photograph. So that is the first recorded gunfight west of the Mississippi. And our office, does this have a laser pointer? Our office is right here now. So that building doesn't stand there anymore. So there's kind of a rich history there in Springfield. We're also kind of at this intersection of Tornado Alley and Route 66. So pretty common landscape around us. This is kind of the rural community. And, Brandon and I have grown up kind of being around and sometimes even constructing these types of really utilitarian buildings in the place that we grew up, very agricultural. So again, another shot of Route 66 here. This is in Devil's Elbow, Missouri, which is where I grew up. So the Big Piney River crosses right under here. And then this is one of the signs along Route 66 that now has been moved onto I-44. This was my uncle. My uncle had a store called the Hillbilly Store, and this was the sign that he had back in the 60s and 70s. So this kind of kitschy, kind of clever, witty stuff, highly graphic, two-dimensional approach to surfaces kind of also makes its way into our work at times. So does anybody know what this is? Anybody ever seen one of these? You did it. I saw it. What'd you call it? A whirligig? Yeah, we used to call them whirligigs, or my dad called them hillbilly yo-yos. So the point is, it's a button with a string through it. And so it's how, when I was a kid, we could pass the time with found objects. So it's about making something out of very little, finding the opportunities that exist in things that are maybe unintended, translating objects and materials, using them in a different way that kind of brings new meaning to them. So this is another image that I grew up with. This is the album cover to Kansas's Mask album. And the image is maybe a little bit dark, but that's kind of intentional. When I was a kid, I was really interested in this image because if you can't see from the back of the room, it's a portrait that's created out of all sorts of aquatic animals, which I thought was this really kind of grotesque but powerful image that kind of changes the meaning of each one of those animals. Well, as I got older, this image always stuck with me from this album cover, and I realized that it was actually a painting done in the 1500s by an artist named Giuseppe Arcimboldo, who did a whole series of these types of paintings where he was taking some objects, collaging them, and bringing new meaning to them by rearranging them in a different way. So again, that's kind of a theme in our work, and thinking about, especially when we do so much renovation work and additions to existing buildings, is how can we bring new meaning to those things that already exist by thinking about them differently? So it really begins as a very sort of pragmatic approach to problem solving. So we talk a lot about this in our office. We tend to use a lot of analogies in our office, but we emphasize the importance of pragmatism before the poetic stuff. So in this little chart, this little graphic, it's, the mathematic equation says that it's pragmatism is greater than poetry, although this poetry still exists. Another way to read it is to say that pragmatism is first, and then it yields the poetry. So this is something that we talk about again in our office, is making sure that we're dealing with problems in a really significant and sort of thoughtful way before we ever get to trying to overlay some sort of poetry that may not be really all that relevant. So the poetry comes from the pragmatism. So this is the first project I want to show you, and again, I'm going to try to move through these fairly quickly, but this was one of the first projects that we did after we started our practice. It was the first project that we did for Missouri State University. So they had seen another project, another interiors project that we had done in town for a school of cosmetology on a really limited budget. And they came to us and said, we have this 10,000 square foot student game room in the basement of the student union, and nobody will go down there. It has no daylight. It's really not a very great space. But we have a really limited budget, and you have to get this done over the summer. Would you guys be interested in doing it? And of course we said, yeah. We wanted to work for the university. So second largest university in the state at that point, and they're just a few blocks from our office. So this is the campus. You can kind of see football stadium and such, but our little 10,000 square foot space was in the basement of the student union here. So this was the approach into this game center space when we began the project. And this is what the space looked like, 2 images. So really just lay-in ceiling tile, some carpet, and then some pool tables, foosball. It did have a bowling alley kind of on one end as part of that 10,000 feet. So as we began to look at the space, they told us that we had $13 a square foot to do this project over the summer. So our initial thoughts were, well, we could just remove all of the ceiling tile. We'll do some new lighting because everybody loves exposed structure. We'll take up all the carpet because the carpet's got to get replaced, and we'll just grind and polish the floors, and we'll come up with some kind of cool paint scheme, and that's about it. So what we did is we started to look at costing this because the budget became a real driver for how we could approach the design. And we learned that if we pulled up all the carpet and ground and polished the floors, we had spent half of our $13 a square foot with that one decision. So we knew that we had to get a little more thoughtful about that. Another thing that they told us is we also want you to try to find a way to brand it to the university, but we are so sick of the logo for the university, we won't let you use the logo. You can't use the logo. So their mascot is the Bears. So we began to think about bears and try to find kind of different ways to brand this. We began to think about bear fur, but we thought that would probably collect a bunch of junk that you couldn't keep clean. We couldn't think of a way to use claws in any way, and so we landed on honey. We began to look at images of honey, which had this really awesome kind of amber, translucent quality to it. And so we found these images of honeycomb here, and simultaneously an image of panel light, which had this real resemblance to honey. So the organization of the space really became about how do we just define this kind of wide open space with a couple of prefabricated walls, one here and then one here, that sort of starts to take this big 10,000 square foot space and establish some hierarchy in the room and organize the room. So it was really about just kind of making this sort of place in the middle that's more of a social space. It then separates things like pool tables, which would never move, and ping pong tables, which could move, and then support a small platform for a poetry slam, and then video gaming systems and the bowling alley. So here again is this image of what the space looked like with the lay-in ceiling, and then the insertion of these two sort of translucent walls that made this reference to honey in these walls. So as we priced the panel light, we found we couldn't afford it. So the armatures became just these, the same armature repeated, to be honest, I've forgotten how many times now, but they could be prefabricated in a shop off-site and then brought in and bolted into place. The panels then are just polycarbonate panels, and we achieved the color, which we would have gotten through the panel light. We achieved the color via these 4-foot-long strip fluorescents that are mounted to the armatures with a polycarbonate sleeve that gives it that amber color. It was also about thinking about how to not provide places that students could hide, so that the control desk could see feet beyond. It incorporates a shelf here, so places for students to drop their backpacks or books, a soda cup, those kinds of things. And then again, just really paying attention to how the whole thing is detailed, how we were feeding conduit down in through the armature to serve those fluorescent lights. There you can see the feet, and it kind of establishes this kind of new experience in this space. We couldn't replace the ceiling grid, so really all we did was remove it where the armatures could bolt to the deck above, and then all of this grid stayed in place. We salvaged light fixtures and just reorganized them. But you can see again these silhouettes that are created behind, so again there are still no places for students to completely hide from the front desk. So our practice, probably 80% of our practice is in education, about half of that in K-12 and the other half in higher ed. The remaining 20% of our practice is odds and ends. We still consider ourselves a generalist practice, although we do a lot of work in education. So this project is actually a church project up outside of Kansas City. So this red dot represents kind of the heart of downtown in Kansas City, and our project was up here in Liberty. So Liberty is a small town known for, again, the Old West, the first bank robbery west of the Mississippi by Jesse James and his gang. But you can see that it's kind of a small town with a lot of rich tradition. Farmers market there on the square. And so the church that we were working with, to kind of cut through a 10-year-long story of working with this church, they ended up purchasing a piece of property kind of in the Northland, what they called the Northland. So out into the suburbs, which would allow them to eventually relocate their entire church and grow. This is Hallmark cards here, and this is the hospital. So this kind of hilltop 30-acre site is what they had purchased to build their kind of first phase of a new church on. It had this great visibility from I-35, which takes you on up to Des Moines from Kansas City, but it also had this kind of view down into the valley of this subdivision. So a lot of times what we do on sites is we try to explore the opportunities in the sites and try to find inspiration from what exists. But this site was really a 30-acre hayfield. These are the only two structures that were on it. One was this old windmill and the sign that the church had erected. So what we really focused on was this strong horizon line. And then looking back down into the valley, again, this strong horizon line with these rooftops in the neighborhood that sort of represents the people that they're trying to reach as a church. So we went through a number of iterations with this congregation, and it wasn't until we really began to dig into the history of the United Methodist Church that we began to gain traction that we could build on for a design solution. So, not being a Methodist, myself or my partner, we began by researching the insignia of the United Methodist Church, the two flames and the cross. Well, if you're not familiar, the two flames represents two churches coming together to create the United Methodist Church. The flame representing the Holy Spirit that's represented in this biblical scriptures of Acts 2, which is about the Pentecost. Okay? The Pentecost is the descension of the Holy Spirit down to earth. So then we began to research the Pentecost and looked at a number of sort of Renaissance paintings. This one by Titian, but they were all they all used a lot of the same symbolism, which was a dove up high representing the Holy Spirit, fire coming down between the dove and land, and then the people below, again, receiving the Holy Spirit. So we've also looked at doves, and we asked the question, how do you know if it's a dove? So one thing that we learned was that in either photographs of doves or even in artist depictions of doves, whether they were done by John Lennon or Picasso, they all sort of had this similar upswept gesture in their wings. So we began to sketch this strong horizon line and this upswept motion of the dove's wings, which then began to translate into this project. So again, you kind of see this reference to the doves, the white wings of the doves, masonry down below this kind of strong horizontal, which is kind of the earth, and then an insertion of reds and oranges of color, that representation of fire that happens between the dove and the horizontal plane of the ground. So when we began to talk about these things as ideas, this church that had been really sort of divided between traditionalists and contemporary worshipers really began to come together around the symbolism that this contemporary building could provide that would also meet their budget. One thing that the city of Liberty told us, though, is that we could not use any metal wall panels. So we were really battling the budget. So metal wall panels, for that upper portion became a really obvious choice. But the city completely denied that through one of their ordinances. So what we did is, looking for kind of substantial materials, found these terracotta roof shingles that we used to create the wall surfaces. So up until this point, that product had only been available in Europe, but they had recently opened up a plant in Ohio, which made it much more accessible. Worked with them to develop a couple of different colors, and then a pattern that repeats that we could convey to the contractor, but that would look random. And then this is that entry court, which again is all about this sort of color that's carved out of the center portion of the entry. The bell was salvaged from, actually refurbished from their previous church location that had burned years ago. So we were able to refurbish that and sort of remount it in above the new entrance. And then just a really simple lobby space with this large glass window, though, that overlooks all of those rooftops that, again, represents the families and people that they're trying to reach and connect to in the community. So again, sort of taking that idea inside, you have the warmth of wood, a natural material that's kind of at the people scale with this strong horizon line or horizontal line, and then the white that wraps the perimeter. It was also important to us that we try to find ways to bring in natural daylight instead of creating this sort of black box worship experience, which was another sort of negotiating exercise with some worship leaders in the church. But they knew they would like to have natural daylight, but they just weren't comfortable that they could do it with the technology that they needed. So again, it was about bringing it in indirectly and screening it, and then combining that with some electric light in some coves and places. So here what you see is electric light here, but then this is all natural daylight coming through this gap. So here again, kind of finally, you can see that sort of reference to the horizon line. So fast forward a few more years, we've done a number of projects with Missouri State University after that little game center project. And the president of the university, whose father was actually the dean of the School of Architecture at University of Arkansas in Fayetteville when he was a child. So the Missouri State's president is an attorney, but by trade or by training, but he had this sort of appreciation for and an understanding of what architecture can do for a campus. So he came up with the idea that they needed to develop a new welcome center and really sort of establish a stronger recruitment arm in their university. Again, recruitment at higher ed is really competitive, not just for athletes, but students in general. And so this idea of a welcome center that could be sort of a physical and metaphorical front door for the university was really important to him. Not a big program. It's only about 13,000 square feet. But they told us where the site would be, which was right here at the intersection of a major north-south thoroughfare, National Avenue, and this new signaled intersection that they had developed into the campus, which they called Bear Boulevard. So they came to us and said, we think you guys are the firm that we just need you to do this project, and it's got to be done quickly, and you'll be working with the president and his cabinet, basically. That was our committee. So this is that signaled intersection, and the site, which you can see was a parking lot. But this is the student union, and there's a really large bear statue outside the student union, again, sort of icon for the campus. So what we began to do is think about the sort of process of arriving at the building, whether you're a busload of high school students or you're a mom and dad with your 17-year-old kid that's getting ready to graduate, or if it's somebody that just wants to wander in off the street and learn about the university. So it really became about kind of thinking about how you kind of arrive by vehicle, and then how you move into the building, and then through a series of displays and information, and then back out if it's a guided tour, so that you're on axis with the bear statue. So it's again about starting to establish some relationships between this sort of perimeter site, and then establish some relationships back deeper into the core of campus. So this, as part of the campus master plan, we knew is kind of slated to be removed. This street would be removed and turned over to a pedestrian thoroughfare at some point in the future. So it became also, we were trying to also pay attention to the fact that this is this major intersection and trying to respond to that corner condition. So a series of study models. We still do a number of study models in the office to try to explore ideas along with our sort of computer software. But a scheme that started to emerge was sort of strengthening the edge of the campus, which is sort of defined down here by Cheek Hall, maintaining that as a build-to line, seeing this as a relatively small program, but stretching it north-south so that along the street it really feels more substantial than the program suggests. The other thing that we worked at doing was trying to take a small portion of that program and stack it onto a second floor, again, so that the building has a stronger presence along the street. And then with this opportunity for expansion over time, and then we were also simultaneously working on a master plan programming document for expansions to the campus bookstore, and looking at how those two projects would work together. So you can see here the way the plan developed, and then this notion in the site development, the way tours would extend out, circle around in campus, and then return back to the Welcome Center. So again, zoomed in a bit, and this notion that there would be a sort of public plaza between the building and the intersection that could be used for larger outdoor events. And then the interior of the program is really just this 100-seat flat floor presentation room that opens up into the lobby so that space can can work together for larger functions like this, banquets, press conferences, those sorts of things. And then just a series of support spaces behind that, mechanical systems, catering, kitchen, and so forth. And then this edge, this kind of narrow piece along the west facade, we called the gallery. So there's a series of displays that you can move through, and then again exit out the building out into another small sort of gathering area before a tour begins, and then you end up on axis with the bear statue. And then returning back. So this is that west facade. This idea that on the south end of the building, it's highly opaque with service spaces, and then as the elevations move toward the north, they become much more transparent, which was a bit of a mandate from the president. He talked about this building, wanted to be able to see into the building, see the activity inside, and this idea of transparency. So then this upper surface is Swiss pearl and perforated that works as a sunscreen on that west facade. The perf pattern was developed from scanning a composition book, which goes back to the history of the institution as a teacher's college. So we were looking for ways to begin to brand this building, building on the traditions or lack thereof, really, that the university had. So this reference back to a composition book as being kind of the heart of the student's experience was scanned and then digitized and translated into this perf pattern. So again, with student tours beginning here, student ambassadors can then begin to have stories to tell about the building as they begin tours. So this is one of the sheets from our construction documents where each one of those panels are laid out, numbered, mock-ups that were developed with a local fabricator, and studying the way they would affect light. So this is that really transparent north end of the building, and you can see the way the sort of stair rises up over the entry and then leads you down on the second level to administrative offices on the second level. So it's a bit of a kind of a ceremonious journey up to the admissions offices, which was intentionally, it was intended to be kind of a special process to get there because going to college is a big deal. So here you can see some of those diagrams about the way we were thinking about that, and then this 24-foot square bear head. So this is the logo. This is a place where they really wanted us to use the logo in a new way. So the logo is developed as a series of steel angles, and you can see that it reads from both sides. So it's one image that reads from both sides because of those strips. And then that screen, that also serves as a screen to the intersection beyond. So once you're in the building, although it's highly transparent, you sort of have this buffer to all the traffic outside. And then a series of touch panel screens, and then there's that pathway up to the upper level. There's a little kind of overlook here, which is kind of enlarged over the vestibule, which is a widened space basically in the hallway for an ensemble or a quartet for special events, so you have music kind of fill the space. Airplane hangar door so that those two spaces can kind of work together. But this is that 100-seat presentation room, skylit from above. And then there's that stair that kind of leads you up. So this is a shot before the plaza was constructed, night shot, and then now after the plaza has been constructed. So these are used for press conferences and such when the weather is really nice. So, okay, so a couple of years after that, how am I doing on time? Am I doing okay? I didn't check. Do I need to pull this out? John, you'll flag me, right? Okay, all right. So the other part of our practice is we do quite a bit of work in K-12 schools. And the things that we learn doing K-12 work kind of inform what we do in higher ed and vice versa. So that seems to work fairly well. Up until recently, really all of our K-12 work, though, has been done in outlying rural areas. So really small districts. So I'm not showing you some of those types of projects, but this is still this is one of the largest projects we had done to this point. So again, starting with the really small work in interiors and then trying to grow our practice and grow the scale of work that we're doing as we've sort of built credibility among clients. This is a district that we worked kind of like we worked with Missouri State University in that we started small, we did some renovation work, we did another little addition over here, and we renovated a project over here, and then they said, we've got to build a new middle school. So this is in Reed Spring, Missouri, which is down south of Springfield, closer to Table Rock Lake, but you can sort of read the topography. The grades are tremendous grades, deep valleys and ravines, and this is the town of Reed Spring, and this is our site right here. So you can see some of these small residential communities, but the town, the students that come to school here kind of come from all around the area. So the site that they had purchased was here. I think it was 90 acres. Heavily wooded, lots of terrain, and this is all of these gray buildings are high school, elementary school, and then this was the middle school. So the idea was to kind of move out of this and be able to sell this off and pull the middle school down into a ring road that we had proposed so that it strengthens the connection amongst all of these facilities in their campus, and then we could start to use things like parking areas for dual use, right, across different multiple facilities. But in doing that, in our conversations with the owner, this was a really easy discussion. There was no arguments about trying to preserve the natural landscape here. They understood the value of the land that they had purchased in terms of its beauty, its sort of natural beauty, and they agreed with us that we did not want to take this approach. This would be the easy approach, which is to find the flattest piece of this property that you bought, and we'll build a school there. But through our analysis, what we talked with them about is that it would be much wiser for us to build this new building into a ravine or into a hillside and preserve the flattest portions for athletic fields that they were going to need in the future. Otherwise, it was going to have the reverse effect, right? And they were going to have to clear even more land when it came time to build athletic fields. So our proposal was to build this new facility in a ravine and bury the two largest pieces of the program, which were gymnasium and 900-seat auditorium. That was the intention. There was that would also provide them with storm safety, which this project we were selected for a year after. So I think it was in 2012 is when we actually began this project, which was a year after the tornado hit in Joplin, Missouri. So this is kind of a quick diagram, but you can see here that these are the two spaces. This is the auditorium that's buried into the hillside, the practice gym over here, and then this kind of simple bar of classrooms that kind of extends out from the grade. And then they're linked via this 3-story atrium that's skylit across this 350-foot long retaining wall, essentially. So again, the analogy back to kind of the local landscape was this notion of these two rooms being the cave behind the bluff, the stream being the place where everybody sort of gathers and is the social space and connector, and then this shed on the outside, this really kind of simple and utilitarian form. So this is a view from what we call the sort of parents' entry. So cars drop off here with administrative offices, and then this is above the gymnasium, and you can see this sort of glowing red egress stair out of those two spaces. So as you approach the building, it kind of looks like this, and you already see this woodlands beyond the school. So kind of from the south end, you can see this retaining wall. This actually connects back over to the high school, down through the wall, and then down a stair into this space. This being the bus drop-off area, and you can see the woodlands here on the left. So view from the woods. So the idea is that these classroom bars would actually have these collaborative spaces in between that provide access out into the landscape. So teachers actually hold class outside in these spaces, but because it's so remote, this issue of security is really non-existent. So again, night shot into the atrium, so kind of public access, and then this big slot into the auditorium here, and then another big slot into the gymnasium, and then the stair that sort of cascades up. So again, performance space in the auditorium, but then that public space all completely daylit, and then populated with outlets and connectivity through here. So it's really sort of heightened the kind of social aspects of being in middle school. So this was highly functional, right? So one of the things that we talked a lot about is, well, with this 3-story atrium, how do you prevent kids from, throwing each other off when they're horsing around and those sorts of things. So that's really the development of this as a guardrail, but it's all wood, which is, again, this reference back into the woodlands behind. Library, one of those collaborative spaces that exits outside. So there's that library space. And then classrooms, again, lots of opportunities for teachers in side-by-side classrooms to actually come out into the hallway spaces so that the hallways are really treated as teaching zones as well. And then again, all of those, with direct connections into that atrium and equipped with lots of technology. Okay, so we're going to jump cities again. So Missouri State University has another campus, which is their 2-year open enrollment institution in West Plains, Missouri. So this is the town of West Plains. You can kind of see the Missouri State University West Plains campus is kind of right in here. So the campus began in 1963, and we were hired several years ago, shortly after we did that little game center space. We were actually hired through an interview process to design 2 buildings at the same time on this campus. But they had no campus master plan. It's not really a campus. It's more like a collection of buildings that they own. And so when we were hired to do this, we felt the need to start to establish some sort of kind of really loose campus planning guidelines. And so that was this diagram that kind of came out of that process. So we were hired to do these 2 buildings. Fast forward a few years, and we were hired to do this building, which this building never got finished, never got constructed. So the program that was in this got moved to this. This is a post office that the university owned and was leasing back to the post office. So they allowed that lease to expire and said, we were never able to get the funds to do this project. We're going to try some different funding sources, and we're going to kick the post office out, take over this building, occupy it, and do some sort of addition to this, essentially providing them with their first campus union that they'd ever had. So this district, the West Plains area, is one of the poorest congressional districts in the country. It's like a 10-county region, something like that. So this idea of open enrollment at this 2-year college feeding into the 4-year institution is a really key educational opportunity for this area of the state. Okay? It serves a real sort of social and educational mission for the institution. So after we did that really loose campus planning that really wasn't campus planning, it was just kind of an idea so that we could do these other 2 buildings, the university took it upon themselves to work a little bit more comprehensive campus plan themselves in-house. So they had some staff in-house and kind of built upon some of the ideas that we were proposing, one of which was this framing of a court or a sort of campus quad around an existing clock tower, and building on the idea that this street would never go away. So academic buildings would kind of primarily reside over here on the left, and then more student life buildings would be over here on the right. So here's that post office that we were going to renovate and do an addition to. And then program from this building, which never built, this building here, which was administrative offices, this being some student services, and then this being the campus bookstore. All of these programs would be incorporated into this little 18,000 square foot building. So this figure ground, you can see, is a little more representative of what actually exists on site rather than the notion of the campus plan. So we just began to do diagrams, again, understanding that part of the campus plan was to take this street, close it, and make it a campus public space, kind of in between these existing buildings. And so if we're going to do a renovation of this building and an addition to it, what is its relationship to what would be a future quad as well? Also looking at the way students would move around on campus and their effect on that sort of drove how the program would get laid out here. And then this idea of using the south side of this building that would eventually face this quad as a sort of outdoor porch. I skip over that. It's also in a seismic zone, so we had to do some seismic upgrades to the building. But here you can see the old post office, and then our addition, which essentially doubles its size. And then, again, the post office being built in the early 60s, no insulation, brick on block, not very weather tight, lots of kind of envelope problems. So one of our big thoughts was to sort of wrap this whole thing with a new skin that would provide higher performance for them. So that's this, you can see the mineral wool kind of going on, and this lightweight metal skin. Again, this project we did for about $230 a square foot. So with all of the seismic upgrades and those sorts of things, was a bit of a challenge. But the idea was that because we're in the seismic zone, this notion of a really lightweight skin, which would reduce our structural costs to wrap this existing building, using masonry where it matters, which is kind of right along the entries where people would touch it, and you need that durability, and then that masonry sort of tying it back into the campus context, and then this one single box of program inside that is branded blue and absorbs sound. Another thing that we're starting to do more and more of is doing some of our own energy analysis early on in projects. This is Saphira that we use, which has gotten really popular, where we're looking at daylighting studies in this program or this diagram. So you can see inside the existing building really blue, which means it's not getting a lot of daylight. You probably can't see it very well. There are actually 4 little dots here where we tried to drop in some skylights, but they just didn't make a large enough impact. But public spaces like classrooms and then the union itself and bookstore are actually getting good daylight. Some of this yellow is probably a little too hot. But this is a tool that we're using to try to get smarter about some of these sort of intuitive decisions that we make. One thing here, too, that's maybe interesting to note, this is on the energy side. So we are a 2030 signee. And so based on the 2030 targets, we should have been at about EUI of 23, and we actually hit closer to 30, 31. So we didn't quite get there. But again, we wouldn't have even known that were we not using tools like this software. So really quick kind of rundown. You can see the old post office here, kind of infilled with programs, some offices, classrooms pushed to the perimeter, and then some service spaces inside in the addition. Drops down, there's a slight level change, and then again trying to maximize the usability of this student union space for also public events as well. Carols for study areas. This is the first building that the campus has that's open late into the evenings so that students have a place to go. It's highly commuter campus. So students would go and they'd go to class and then they'd go back to their car and sleep, rather than because they didn't have any place to go and begin to build relationships on campus. So that was a really important aspect of the project for us. Again, being limited in how much square footage we could construct, this idea of this covered porch became a way for us to sort of blend inside and outside and maximize the ability to gather people together. And then the bookstore as well. So here's what that looks like at night. Again, this notion of branding. So the mother campus, right? The big campus is called the Bears. This campus is the Grizzlies. So working on both campuses, it's like what's the difference, right? What makes a grizzly a grizzly? So we researched grizzlies. And what we learned was that grizzlies are really brown bears. They're a subspecies of brown bears. But what makes them grizzlies is the fact that as they age, their fur develops these white tips, right? So they have this sort of grizzled fur, which you see here. So our thought was to try to just deal with the way this metal skin would capture light and reflect light in a different way. So you see these sort of striations that are developed, which were 2 separate panel profiles that interlock. So again, mock-ups, you can sort of see this panel here, and then it interlocks with a separate panel here. And even in the shop, you can see the way it sort of catches light in a different way. So it's pretty interesting. Sort of fades back and changes over the entry. Again, sort of random connections in landscape. It's all just about kind of composition and developing that skin. This is the most transparent building that they have on campus, too. So this idea of providing places that you could see the activity inside and branding inside with this blue is their school color, became really important. So this is all tectum, right, which is sound absorbing, really durable tectum panels. So we use the tectum to cut down on reverberations inside that space, and then felt walls that sort of wrap and define these alcoves for student study. And then again, similarly to the Welcome Center, there's this sort of elevated platform with technology right around that corner. So a podium can be set up here, and you can do speaking engagements to a larger group out to the left. So that sort of serves as a speaking podium. Again, that open, you can see some of that here. So this is the first kind of community event that they had there in that space. Hand-me-down furniture from the larger campus is kind of the way this campus rolls. So, and then in the connection, kind of the main cross-axis in the space, this is the existing post office. So we just really sort of tried to develop this as a really nice, high-quality surface with these kind of pristine glass cases so that they could display statues of grizzly bears that one of the professors had collected over the last 25 years. So again, even in there, it's about branding it, but taking some of these are not really high art, but by placing them in these glass cases and lighting them as if they are, it elevates them to something that's really special for the campus. So there's a shot of the post office when we started, and that's essentially the same shot today. The street is still there, but again, the idea is that this would go away and become public lawn. So this is the last project. So again, to kind of end with this, which is kind of a radical shift from that initial Game Center project. So this is the most recent project that we've completed at Missouri State University, which is a new student success center for the College of Business. So this is back on the Springfield campus. You can, again, see the football stadium here. They have this kind of large pedestrian mall here, and then Glass Hall is right here, just south of new soccer and track. So ironically, Glass Hall is not named Glass Hall because it had a lot of glass in it. It was named for Mr. Glass, who owns the Kansas City Royals, right? So ironically, it's all precast building that had very little glass and connectivity to the campus. That was built in like the early 90s. 4-story building that sits right here. And then our project was to renovate, essentially gut the ground floor of this building, reconstruct the ground floor, and then reimagine the public spaces on floors 2, 3, and 4 of this building, while designing and constructing this, the new Student Success Center, on its east end, which is right alongside the shuttle route. So we were really limited by this transit way on the east end. The library here, the public mall. So these are the 3 large auditoriums that were on the ground floor of the existing building. So those were not reconstructed, new finishes, but everything else was gutted and reconsidered. So from here over is the new Student Success Center, 4-story space. And then these spaces on the ground floor, which were almost completely solid precast walls, but not structural, were all removed and replaced with glass to develop these sort of student concourses that connect over to the Student Success Center and then out onto the public lawn. And then again, spaces on 2, 3, and 4. So you can see this existing building, and then all of these spaces in here were all precast. So it was really simple to just kind of remove all of that, go back with a simple curtain wall that adds tons of transparency out onto the lawn. And then this new addition here, which is Student Success Center on second floor, professional classrooms on the third floor, and then up on the fourth floor, some additional kind of executive classrooms, and then in the corner, what they called the boardroom. Boardroom that overlooks the mall. You can see the transitway, and the way the program is kind of lifted up to allow the transitway to pass in underneath because the program was really beginning to encroach upon the transitway. This is a project we did collaboratively with Perkins and Will out of Minneapolis. So again, kind of in the addition, so it's really all about this sort of public space and providing a place that's full of light and bright and opportunities for students to connect with one another. So these spaces are all used day to day as student study areas. Some professors will reserve them and actually conduct classes in there. And then whenever they have corporate execs come in to do interviews for internships with the students, that's what those are used for, as interview rooms. So executive classrooms full of light that have these great views over campus. And then this is in that public space on the ground floor of the existing building that, again, now connects out into the mall outside. Okay, so another one of the things that we talk about in our office is how awesome the old Looney Tunes cartoons were. So Brandon and I both grew up on these cartoons, and they are the greatest cartoons ever, right? So SpongeBob is kind of close, but I still think these are the best. But the reason these are the best is because, in my mind, is because when you're 7 years old and you see Bugs Bunny blow up Yosemite Sam with a stick of dynamite, that's really funny, right? But when you're 37 or 47 years old and you see that Elmer Fudd is actually singing opera to Bugs Bunny, that's funny on a whole nother level, right? So it's the idea that these cartoons are layered with meaning, and you can go back to them time and time again, and you see things that you never saw before. And we try to do that in our work. We try to do things that are not completely one-liners, right? So sometimes we don't even care if anybody ever sees the little simple move that we made, because we have a feeling that somebody will discover it at some point. And that's how I think buildings have value over time, is when they can give something back. So Chuck Jones, one of the creators, this is a quote from him, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there is the willingness to think about what it is you're doing. Shot of our office, some of our staff. Thank you guys for having me today. This has been a blast.